come to cricket8.com, you will find 8,000 live scorecards a year with visual representations of who is actually winning the game. Plus, we have live footage from some matches as well, not to mention information on what the markets are doing. There is no place to follow this game live like Cricket 8.
So just to repeat the message, remember to sign up on cricket8.com. All right then. So welcome to Cricket8 Podcast. I'm Megha and join me here is Jarrod Kimber. And we're going to be discussing about India versus Bangladesh Test Series. 2 tests, one in Chennai, another one in Kanpur, and all that's there to look ahead to. So first things first, let's start by talking about the key matchups. Jarrod, India's batting lineup is famed. They have plenty of names that can intimidate the opponents. But talking about Bangladesh's pace attack in particular, in the second innings of the second test, took 10 wickets, and that's a rare thing for Bangladesh. High on confidence after that 2-0 sweep against Pakistan. How do you see this one faring up?
Yeah, I think they got one of the more interesting bowling attacks that anyone has taken to India in a long time. Like, I don't know how I mean, we'll obviously get to batting and everything else, but they have a genuine 5-person bowling attack, right? They've got 2 very good quality spinners who spin it either way. And then they have 4 or 5 different seamers who are all handy and interesting in their own ways. It's not that it matches up in quality with India, but it is actually more similar to an Indian lineup, right? Like, there aren't that many teams who can turn up, and India, like, I think we had a comment on one of our earlier shows of, like, you know, what kind of pitches should India make? Well, it's like, you wouldn't really want to make a pitch for either of spin or pace, right? Like, if you're going to do a pitch, for probably batting pitch is the best one, and to be say, you know, our bowlers will just outlast them, right? Like, they will, you know, they might not make a lot of runs, but eventually the bowlers will just find a way to get the wickets, where it might be a little bit harder for a Bangladeshi lineup. But yeah, so I think that's a really interesting kind of system, all things considered.
And interesting comments already. So they've shifted our attention to India's bowling attack and pace in particular, with Arjun mentioning is Mone Morkel the right man for India's bowling coach role. TSC Photography is just happy to see us here, and Dhruv points out that the key battle would be between Ash and Jaddu versus the rest. So taking all of these questions into consideration, but talking about India's bowling attack.
Oh, well, I just want to go on the one that Simple Maths did, which was the other comment, where he said, big difference between bowling at mediocre Pakistan batters and Indian batters. There is, but that's not what I'm really talking about here. What I'm talking about is the overall variety of, like, think about when England turn up, right? Think about when Australia turn up. Australia are having to use Matt Kuhneman as their second spinner, or Mitchell Swepson as their second spinner, right? Todd Murphy, these sorts of players. Not very proven, not a lot of experience, hoping that it works. Tom Hartley, Shoaib Bashir, right? You know, Ajaz Patel and
Untested.
Yeah, whoever the second New Zealand spinner is on a day-by-day basis, right? Now look at Bangladesh. So Bangladesh can come over with Shakib Al Hasan, who is a very good quality spinner, and Mahdi Hassan, who's a very good quality spinner. These are tried and tested and quality. Now they're going to have to go up against better batters. I don't think anyone will make the argument that they're not, but that is not the same kind of lineup that we've really seen from anyone going to India. And then on top of that, it isn't like their seam bowling is a weakness, right? Their seam bowling is quite interesting, and you know they've got a reserve of fast bowlers and everything else. So it's a really, really interesting sort of package when you have a look at Bangladesh's bowling. And on top of that, it also does the other thing that the Indian attack does, right? Which is because they have all rounders, and even more so all rounders than what India does, in the terms of you know, Shakib can bat at number. Shakib is a legit, you know, top order batter with more runs than Ravi Jadeja in his career. And Mahdi Hassan is probably batting as well as Ashwin at times, and maybe he's not as consistent as Ashwin, but anything else. But if you just think those two, forget Akshar, because the third all rounder, you know, makes it a little bit more confusing. But if you just look at those two, like, that's a really good lineup. Again, teams haven't been turning up to India with that. No one's expecting Bangladesh to win. Although, to be fair, no one was expecting Bangladesh to win in Pakistan either. So I think it's a much more interesting lineup than probably we will give them credit for. They can go with a couple of extra spinners if they want to as well. We know that their third and fourth spinners are, you know, really high quality as well. if they do see a wicket with a little bit of grass on it, they can chuck in three seamers and give themselves variety there. They've got people who can use pace. They've got, guys who can hit the pitch a little bit more. They've just got a really interesting lineup. And the Indian batters have not been dominating at home for a long time, in part just because of what has happened is that they've gone out of their way to make very spin-friendly wickets. I'm not sure this is the team you want to give a spin-friendly wicket to, right? So we should see something slightly different from India from that perspective. I just think it's a fascinating little contest. India's the favourite. India don't lose at home. I mean, there's nothing to argue there. But there is an element of, it's a bit like when South Africa go to Australia, right? South Africa have a really interesting lineup for Australian conditions, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that South Africa is going to win a game, but there are lots of teams who are better than South Africa who turn up to Australia, and it's like you don't have what it takes to win because your lineup isn't fully formed, right? So I think there's a lot of different interesting takes when you start to split it up like that.
In fact, just 4 tests lost in the last decade for India, so have been absolutely dominant at home. And defeating India in India is a huge achievement that every team looks ahead to. Now, Sports Fan here mentions, and this is sticking to the conversations around conditions. Last time, remember, one of the pitches was a seamer-friendly wicket in pink ball test in Eden Gardens. So just breaking it down, 2015, that phase, India went for very spin-friendly wickets. There was a time in between when India was relying more on its pacers. It had Ishant Sharma operating at his best. Then Jasprit Bumrah was obviously making an impact. So around 2018, India was gravitating towards more of seam-friendly conditions at home. Maybe against Bangladesh, it made sense. Bangladesh, when welcoming any team at home, they dish out tracks that are heavily in favor of spin. So against such an opponent, and considering what your strengths are for India, how do you see the Chennai wicket to behave? How do you expect it to be placed?
I think I'm probably most likely thinking it's just going to be a normal Chennai wicket. Like, as in, I don't think it'll be one of the hotbed wickets that we have seen in some of the test matches. So I expect it to spin. I can't imagine in Chennai they're suddenly going to bring out a green pitch, right?
Yeah.
What they might do is it might be a more batting friendly type surface, right? So it might be a wicket that is a little bit flatter that spins towards the end. And as I said, then you're in a battle of attrition between your spinners and their spinners, and you're backing the fact that your spinners are slightly better, but also that you've got much more quality in your batting lineup. The day-night test is a really interesting one that Sports Fan brings up because I still think India have the better bowlers. I think it was it Dhruv put in something about the fast bowlers, I think, as well, which is quite interesting, which is... And, I think we talked about it. I can't remember. I did a podcast with someone the other day. I might have been with our friend Deep. I do so many podcasts. I can't remember who I speak to. But I think we were talking about, we know that Bumrah's number one. We know that Shami's number one when fit. And we know that Siraj is brilliant. But you probably want Siraj to be your number three because of the way he's very good or very bad, right? And if Shami's injured and Bumrah's being rested, suddenly that bowling lineup doesn't look as good. I don't think there's any situation where you'd be like, Bangladesh are going to, be the better seam bowling. But we've seen them now beat Pakistan in Pakistan, and we've seen them beat New Zealand in New Zealand.
Yeah.
They have seam bowling options that when they run hot can run through you. So that's what I was saying before of like, I think you're better off to just have a sort of a flat surface and say to them, do you really have it in you to make that sort of, if you think about a traditional Indian pitch of scoring 400, 500, 600 in that first innings, right? And really putting pressure on the opposition. And to be honest, test teams don't play like that all that much anymore, but Bangladesh is one of the few that might actually think about that. But putting a lot of pressure on the opposition just by scoreboard and then doing it that way, I think that's where India have their biggest advantage. But to go back to what we were saying before, the Indian batters haven't been smashing the ball at home for a long time. Now, flatter pitches, of course, are already going to be a huge advantage to them in that situation. But I think it does change the way that that they think about it. So if I was doing it, I might even just say to the curators, just produce your normal pitch. We think we're slightly classier in every position, and let's not worry about anything else.
So, what the numbers suggest, particularly in the last 4 years, Indian batters have struggled against spin. We've seen Yashasvi Jaiswal do really well. Shubman Gill struggled in between England series start. He didn't have a great start, but then stepped up and scored crucial runs. But holistically looking at it, Indian batters struggling against spin at home, that kind of complicates the whole scenario. Do you still see that as the situation, or you think that was a blip in between and now they've pulled up their socks and things are better now?
I think the conditions in India over the last couple of years have been as tough for facing spin as I've ever seen consistently anyone have to face. So Donald Bradman and Sunil Gavaskar and Brian Lara, I think, would have struggled in those conditions, right? Like, I don't think I think there was this whole idea of like, oh, India don't play spin as well as they used to. You go back and you have a look at the batting averages against Indian spinners, right? And these are great Indian spinners. We're talking about Harbhajan Singh and Anil Kumble. Average batters could handle them for the first three and a half days of a test match. And then suddenly, now Tom Hartley is a wicket, is a threat, right? Like, a part-time spinner who can't always get in his county side is suddenly ripping through you. And we see other players too, obviously, like, as we talked about before, someone like Kuhneman and Todd Murphy. Todd Murphy's the only one of those guys I would say is like potentially going to be a great spinner. I think the other guys can be handy cricketers, but a great spinner is like a long way off. And Todd Murphy's a mile off from being that bowler at the moment as well. And suddenly they're deadly, right? And so when you start to look at things from that perspective, I think it does change your idea of what is possible. And I see Vignesh saying that Rohit is immune to spin. I think Rohit Sharma's record over the last, whatever it is, 5 or 6 years in India is remarkable, considering the wickets that they have been playing on in that time. And so I do think from that there is a big difference. And so I'm not worried about the Indians playing spin on a normal wicket. Because we saw against England, once it was a normal wicket, they looked fine again, right? Once it was a flatter wicket, I didn't have any problem with the way they played. I have more of a problem with the Indian players playing it on a big spinning wicket, and what they did against South Africa, Australia. I can't remember if they did it against New Zealand, but England and a few other sides was have those ragging turners, right?
Yeah.
And they lost test matches at times because they made it too unpredictable. I don't think you want to make these pitches too unpredictable for this situation. And if that's the case, if you make them like some of the wickets that we have seen test matches played on, with Shakib Al Hasan and Mehdi Hasan and whoever else they want to chuck in there, like they've got so many backup spinners, they might, then I think that would be an issue, right? And I think that, but I just don't see that as a reason or something all that likely.
So we're talking about Indian batters at the moment, and Mukhi says, can Virat regain his test form? Now, that's an interesting question because is he out of form?
You told me off air that he was finished, didn't you?
Did I? when did that happen?
You said that you never rated him, you thought he was overrated, and that his career was finished. That's what you said, isn't it, Megha? Should we put that on the banner on the screen?
That's
anyway, welcome to the last day of Megha's career. No, I'm only joking. Of course you didn't say that.
I was about to say that. Finished who? Me or...
Yeah, you might be finished before him. Look, last year he averaged 55, I think. I don't think it was a great year of Virat batting. Like, I don't think, sorry, numbers-wise I do. But I mean, having watched him, I don't think I thought instantly he was back to form. But I did think he looked pretty good, right? Like, I don't know how everyone else felt about it. But like, I was watching it thinking to myself, he looks like he's back in, he's moving a little bit better, he's feeling a little bit more confident and everything else. So I wasn't thinking to myself that he was out of form at the moment. Whereas before that, obviously, there was an issue for whatever it was, 2 or 3 years. So I don't think he's in that thing. I think the interesting thing with Virat is, and this is a massive, 9 months, 10 months for Indian cricket, and for him particularly. I think it's really interesting watching what Joe Root's done, how it affects Kane Williamson, Steve Smith, and Virat Kohli. Because if Virat Kohli finishes now, in the list of great batters, Joe Root has passed him at the moment. Virat Kohli could still go past him, right? Kane Williamson, if he has another 2 or 3 great years and Virat continues to average 19 or 20, Kane Williamson can go past him in the list of the greatest test batters of all time, right? Steve Smith, as bad as he's been, probably it's very hard for Virat to even catch Steve Smith, although, who knows if he had a great...
body of work.
Yeah, maybe if he has a great 4 years and does that. The point being is, like, there were times when, and all format-wise, Virat Kohli might be remembered as the greatest of them.
Yeah.
But I tell you, 100% that he probably wants to be remembered as the greatest test batter out of all of them as well, right? Yeah. Especially because it's just little things of, he played in a side with like Chris Gayle and AB de Villiers in T20 cricket, right? Rohit Sharma in World Cups. Like, I don't think Virat's legacy is really an issue. But what I do think is over a long period of time, like, I know how there's a reason Virat Kohli is Virat Kohli and Kane Williamson is Kane Williamson and all these guys are who they are. They have a fire. And I think over the last little while, I can see Virat Kohli just thinking to himself, no, it's my time again now. And also just in general, you look at him and Steve Smith, you go through those kinds of dips as a player of that level and you're like, I need to score some runs. Like, do you know what I mean? Like just in general, like I need to be me again. I want to feel like me at the crease. So look, he's only played one test this year, I think, Virat, and that was on that dodgy wicket in Cape Town, was it? I thought he batted okay in Centurion. As I said, in some of the form beforehand, I don't see him as out of form. But what I don't know is, are we going to see that sort of period of 2016, 2017 era again, right? So, we were just looking, I'm finishing off my book, The Top 50 Batters of All Time. So all these things are in the top of my head. We were just looking at some of these numbers. You look at some of these players like Brian Lara and Steve Smith. Brian Lara had like 2-3 year periods of just absolute total dominance when no one could get him out and he made as many runs as he wanted to. And Steve Smith had like a 4-year period, or I think it was a 4-year period, where like almost no one's ever made as many runs outside of Bradman in a 4-year period. Virat kind of has that from 2016, 2017 through to 2019. Outside of that, he's been really good, right? Do you know what he would like more than anything? He'd like to have what Brian Lara had towards the end of his career, and that one last run where he can just put together 2 or 3 more years, and then it doesn't matter whether he's better than Gavaskar and Tendulkar because he's in that conversation forever from then on in, right? These things really, really matter to competitors of that level.
Yeah.
That's what I'm fascinated to see mostly because we have so many Indian test matches coming up in so many different places he likes to play, places he doesn't like to play, all these different things of how is that going to fire him up, Megha, right? I think he's one of the most fascinating cricketers over the next 9 months because it could be he doesn't make any runs and he's like, I'm off, I'm done. I didn't win the World Test Championship. I didn't make any runs. Yeah. Or maybe he wins the World Test Championship and he's off, right? Like he could go that way or he could be like, smashes the ball everywhere for 8 or 9 months and is like, I'm back, baby. Good luck to everyone.
Which is quite a tricky scenario because wins the World Test Championship. And like you mentioned, he's a fierce competitor. In that scenario, he's seeing others from the top 4 still continuing, still scoring runs. And there's nothing wrong about wanting to be a part, wanting to challenge them for those records because records are crucial. Now, Karan Rathore here mentions that Jarrod, you're a director. He just read on Wikipedia. Jarrod is a great actor as well. Like just a while back, he created that scenario where I was the one who said that Virat Kohli is finished. I'm not getting over that anytime soon. Meanwhile, there are a lot of questions around Rohit as well. Simple Maths is at it, says Rohit, 1200s in test, all in wins, high impact batsman. Now his test career actually started around 2018. So a late starter because there wasn't enough place for him. So how do you see his legacy?
Yeah, he's another fascinating one. So, you were talking about before about records matter to them. I don't know. I mean, records don't matter as a cricketer, right? They matter to us as fans, but they don't matter to a cricketer. What matters as a cricketer is kind of legacy, right? And how you are remembered.
Overall, yeah.
Yeah, by your teammates first, but then by your fan bases and then by, cricket media and all those sorts of different things. Rohit, I don't think is driven in the same way as those other people are, right? But what I do think with Rohit, which is very fascinating, is all batters are motivated by different things, right? And I think specifically, you look at someone like Rohit, he's probably motivated by 2 key things. One is making up for the fact that he probably always thought he was this good and he never made these runs earlier in his career.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think he is one of those players of maybe that needs something in his brain to sort of click into place in an innings. So, when I talk to all these test batters, and there are different players who just get motivated by different things. So Mark Waugh is a fascinating one of Mark Waugh doesn't have any high scores in test cricket. And I didn't even ask him the question. He just said it off the top of his head. He's like, yeah, the problem was I got to 100 and I was like, I've done my job. Someone else can go do their job now, right? And complete different motivation than from someone like Brian Lara, right? Who's just like, I've got the first 100 was really hard. Now I'm going to see how much impact I can have on this game. If I want to draw this game, I'm going to draw it on my own. If I'm going to win this game, I'm going to win it on my own. So it's a very different way. Everyone is motivated in different ways. And I think that you look at Virat sometimes and you watch, and I would say all format Virat is like this. You watch him in T20 cricket on a tricky wicket or ODI cricket, and his ability to just be like, that's it. Like, this has got me working now, and I'm going to do it. And Ben Stokes is one of the best examples of a player like this. Ben Stokes is at his absolute best when he's playing to an extreme, right? So whether that be slogging, whether that be blocking, whether that be strike rotating, if he thinks in his mind, all I have to do from here on in is block, it's very hard to get Ben Stokes out over a long period of time. If he says, I'm going to start thrashing around, we know he can hit 4s and 6s pretty much wherever he wants on the field. And if he says he's going to strike rotate, watch him in a one-day knock if he ever comes back. His ability to just block balls into gaps for 2 that other players have to play proper shots at is extraordinary. But the minute you say to Ben Stokes, you can just pick it. This ball you can slog, and this ball you can block, and this ball you can strike rotate. It almost just frazzles his mind a little bit. There's too many options now. One option, Ben Stokes, is great. And I think Rohit Sharma is very similar in that you get him on a flat pitch, it's like it doesn't get his blood boiling, right? It doesn't get him in the same place. So I think that those two guys in the next 8 to 9 months, really interesting to see how much they want to play, how far on they go. We're going to see what is motivating them now, because that's the other thing we've talked about at that level of cricket. You are really talking about a player being motivated, right? But what we are really talking about is what motivates them now. Because what motivates you at 20 is not what motivates you at 30. It's not what motivates you at 35, right? And, it's the Joe Root versus Sachin Tendulkar conversation. If everyone's like, well, look, if he just plays this many test matches, he'll go past Sachin Tendulkar. And it's like, yeah, until the day he's 38 and he rolls his ankle one day and his ankle never feels good again. And he's like, my ankle's going to feel bad. I'd rather just play golf than cricket and, start my own podcast and, take the Barmy Army to other sports. Like, whatever he has to do. We don't know what these guys are going to do, but that's why the next 8 or so months are so fascinating, because chances are no one's going to retire until the end of that England series, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine anyone doing that unless your form completely dropped. So we have like a really nice run for a couple of those players to see where they go.
All right. So Om Prakash over here mentions how Rohit would be remembered for the cultural changes that he brought about, because he too is known as, or was considered at one point as, this generational talent. And purely in terms of talent, he was hyped more than Virat, and rightly so, because Virat also concedes that in terms of talent, Rohit Sharma was ahead of anybody of that age group in India. But then, like you mentioned, Rohit as well, realizing that he's not done what he should or could have in Test cricket. Paucity of opportunities as well there, stepping in pretty late in 2018, all of that combined. But Om underlines the fact that the legacy would be more around the impact that he brought about. And Yashasvi Jaiswal is not too dissimilar as far as that impact scenario is concerned.
Yeah, I think, Rohit's overall legacy is very, very different. And, same with Virat. We're talking more generally as batters here. What they are coming up against in the next little while, well, I mean, I don't know what Rohit's overall record is, but it's, his overall batting average is not as high as someone of his talent should be. So what is it, 45.5, right? And there must be an element of, well, a good 10 tests here and I can knock that up 2 or 3 pegs, right? And that's what it is. I mean, especially because he's only made 4,000 runs. He doesn't need a lot of big innings there. So we don't know where that's going. There's so many exciting, interesting Indian talents coming through. How much they play a part in what the next situation is as well are very fascinating. And, the Bangladesh series is the series right in front of us, and I think it's a fascinating one. But because there is, New Zealand probably less so, but because there is Australia and England on the back of this, that's 3 really good test series in a row. And so it's about, competitiveness at a certain point. Like Jaiswal is a really good example of someone of, we all know how talented he is. In a year's time, we're going to have a much better idea of what his, or at least what his immediate future is, right? We could see from any time Indian fans are talking about their cricket team, what happens. Let's say he doesn't make a lot of runs against Bangladesh, but let's say he averages 38 against Bangladesh and averages the same against New Zealand, goes to Australia, averages 25, goes to England and averages 35. We know what the conversation is going to be. Jaiswal isn't going to be any better or worse than what he is right now. Yeah. But we know what the conversation is going to be. And those are the sorts of things that become really, really tough. And, you know, we know that affected Rohit Sharma and other players as they were coming up, right? And it's worse now, the conversation, than ever before, because of the way social media is, and these guys having their own YouTube pages in some cases and Instagram page. Do you know what I mean? The information comes at you now rather than the way that it used to. So I do think there is a really, I think it's a really interesting part of this whole narrative of what happens to the old guys and then what happens to the young guys, right? And, you know, we haven't even got into the fast bowlers and everything else.
Exactly.
How that goes.
You've actually led me to it. So what about the fast bowlers? There was a question around what after Bumrah or what when Bumrah isn't available. And then Mohammad Shami at the moment isn't available for the first 2 tests of this long home run, this long test run rather. So who do you see as the players to really watch out for? Akashdeep, Yash Dayal, what are your expectations from them?
I'm more interested to see what India thinks their sort of frontliners are. And I want to see if they think about it from a how they rate Bangladesh is really interesting here, because a month ago, let's be really honest, even the most optimistic Bangladesh fan was thinking that when they got to India were going to roll out a kind of combined A and B side, perhaps against them, and it wouldn't matter, and they would go over them. Now we're all sitting there going, wait a minute. Bangladesh look like a challenge, not, you know, I mean, India are still massive favourites in that series, but Bangladesh look like a challenge in a way, as I said before, their bowling lineup that other teams simply do not, right? So do you go, and India don't have that sort of, Umesh Yadav or Ishant Sharma, that sort of guy, which not that long ago they would have, right? Like, they still have some really interesting players. That, you know, T. Natarajan bowled brilliantly in the last IPL. You know, can he suddenly be dusted off and just like he's inexpensive? Junaid Unadkat is one of the worst bowlers in the IPL, but a fantastic red ball bowler. He just hasn't managed to do it at Test cricket level. Yeah, I've seen enough of him bowling, you know, in Ranger games and India A games and everywhere else to know how good he is. Do they go with that sort of bowler, right? And just go, let's just make sure that we're getting what we need. You know, do they go with that more consistent bowling lineup? Do they go with younger, like, you know, was it Akashdeep? I think was the comment a minute ago, right? Do they go with someone like that? They're going to have to make all those decisions. I think it's a fascinating way of looking at it, right? Of who was the seamer that they picked against England, whose name I've now forgotten?
Akashdeep made his debut against England.
Was it Akash? Was he the only other seamer in that series? Who played against South Africa then? Who were the seamers in the South Africa series?
Prasidh Krishna was in the scheme of things as well.
He's injured at the moment, isn't he? Am I right in saying that?
He's actually making a comeback in Duleep Trophy. So.
Okay, great. So I thought he was injured. I was trying to think if there was a third seamer that I'd forgotten.
Mukesh Kumar
I like Ash.
Probably.
Who was that one?
Mukesh Kumar.
Mukesh Kumar. Yeah. Okay. So there you've got 3 guys who I see more as kind of, I don't want to say project players because that's not quite true, but they're not Unadkat, right? Like if you bring Unadkat in, you might complain that he's not quite an international level player at the moment. But we all know what he can do. Whereas Akashdeep, who can nip it around a little bit and has some interesting skills, is averaging, he's only played 32 first-class games, right? So one of those is in a test match. Mukesh Kumar, I think the last lot liked him. I don't know. We're going to find out very soon if the new selection committee and the new team like him. Yeah. But he's another interesting one. But you know what I mean? You kind of have to make that decision between going for someone who is a little bit more experienced and you understand what they're going to do, or trying someone new, because you don't want to be in a position where Bangladesh's seam bowlers are a little bit more
Yeah.
comfortable and confident, right? Even if your bowlers are more talented, if they're younger, these things create a little bit. And then you've got to look at the partnerships and everything else. In Chennai, it probably doesn't matter all that much, right? You probably want two seamers in Chennai if it's a normal Chennai wicket. You want one bowler who's going to bowl really well with the new ball, and you want one bowler who can bowl really well with the old ball. And maybe you keep it as simple as that, and you have a look, and you go from there.
So Dhruv was talking about Unadkat here. 2010 was when he made his debut, had played in the Under-19 World Cup just the previous year, or rather the same year, and was fast-tracked because India needed a left-arm pacer. He was tall, that high release point was something that worked in his favor. But got a chance, got a look in after those truckloads of wickets in domestic circuit for Saurashtra and then for India A and various other first-class games that he played. What do you think didn't really work for him? We saw him against Bangladesh. We've seen fair bit of him from South Africa 2010.
I mean, he's only played 4 tests.
Yeah.
So I don't think India know how good he is, really. I think that he's probably, I know he's a left armer, but he probably, if you think of Shami and Bhuvi, those are probably the kind of bowlers that they bowl at a similar time to him in the game. He's probably a new ball dependent bowler is probably the best way of putting it, right? And because of that, you're in a situation where there were maybe other bowlers who were slightly better at that point. He's still only 32. And as I say, I'm more talking about using him as a stopgap because you know how good he is, right?
Yeah.
So you put yourself in a position where you can do that, and you can play him from that point of view. I've got no issue there. They might go with someone else. As I said, they might try someone younger. They might look at someone who's dramatically different, and they might have a better new ball bowler. I would assume that they think Mukesh Kumar is probably another new bally bowler. Off the top of my head,
No
look
spring
at him.
chicken though.
I was about to say he's not particularly young either, right? And he doesn't have as much experience. I mean, he's played 45 games, but he's not like this massively experienced 30-year-old, right? It's a bit more like a sort of a Scott Boland situation, and you hope that he's the right person at the right time and everything works. But yeah, it's really that matching, Megha. I think the way that I look at it is, I want to know who is going to be best with the new ball and who's going to be best with the old ball. And I put those two together, and then probably I look at the rest of it from, I look at the rest of it from a spin perspective, just because that's what we assume in Chennai we're going to see, right?
Interesting. Now the choice of the balls being used, that's a question that popped up a couple of times. So how much of an issue is it getting accustomed to the SG balls, and what is the story around it?
I've never really heard cricketers ever complain about the SG ball. So the Duke's ball has a really interesting seam on it where it feels different in your fingers. And seam bowlers don't have any issue with it because they don't have to worry about it too much. But spin bowlers will sometimes tell you that it feels like it cuts into their fingers a little bit. I remember Ajanta Mendes, I was interviewing Stuart Law, and Ajanta Mendes came over to tell him that he was struggling with the Duke's ball and the seam. And Stuart Law said, deal with it. That's what they have here. Like, if you're going to play, you need to learn how to use it. I don't think I've heard too many conversations where people have had that sort of issue when it comes to those sorts of balls, right? So no, I'm not. I think that everyone feels fairly comfortable with SG balls. Dukes are. I don't know if you pick many balls up, Megha, and you felt the Dukes just feel a little bit different than other balls. So I do think there is an element of that sort of stuff as well. And I just want to go back to this of
I was trying to distract you with something else, but yeah.
No, simple maths going
Giving me a way
Mukesh and Unadkat Trundlers. It's not about Trundlers because you're talking about new ball bowling. So Trundlers is not an issue for new ball bowling. So you have to listen to the full comment. What I said was they'll be thinking about getting a new ball bowler and an old ball bowler. These are new ball bowlers. That's why you're calling them Trundlers, because they need the new ball to be effective. Then you get some other bowlers who can do other things. That's how you build a bowling lineup, especially in a place like Chennai, where seam is not going to be the most important thing in the world.
And now to conclude this conversation, your choice of spinners. Who are you leaving out?
Oh, did we have this conversation recently? Was it you and
In
I?
fact, the other thing as well, I was the one who was I was
You
the one who
dropped Ravi
actually,
Jadeja, didn't you?
yeah, I had Akshar.
Cut that one for social.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the more are you saying that based on what you would do? Are you saying that based on reporting and you've heard it, or where's that come from?
I wanted to make a left field choice, literally, although they're both left arm pacers. I mean, sorry,
Hey.
left arm spinners. Look where we are heading with all that conversation around
So
pacers. But
today
yeah,
you've said that Virat is overrated, and
did I? When
you?
did that happen?
I heard that. Maybe it was just me who heard that.
Rakshit. That would be Rakshit.
So okay, so you've got Akshar in, and we're assuming 3 spinners. So who are your other
Yeah.
2 spinners?
No, I'm not the one making selection this time around
course
because
not.
I
No one
tried
is.
that.
No one's making a selection. I'm pretty sure.
Jarrod,
I
your
could be
take.
wrong here, Megha, but I'm pretty sure this is not the official selection meeting.
Meeting
We're not
here.
in it.
Right.
But I'm asking you, I'm interested genuinely in what you think your 3 spinners will be then.
Look, I tried going with Akshar just because I think there's more to him that we've not yet explored. I know the previous management in Test didn't back him enough. I want to justify that choice. There was this while in between where Akshar wasn't the same bowler that he had promised to be with that debut England series where he picked
Yeah.
up those 25 wickets. So there's more to him that I'm keen to see if I had my say, if I were to have my say. So it is a tricky question because we've seen Kuldeep contributing with the bat as well. So against England, Kuldeep, because of the fact that he also realized that he'd need to contribute with the bat as well, considering how good the remaining 3 were with the bat. So Kuldeep is in. Between Akshar and Jadeja, it gets tricky. And Ashwin at home in Chennai, too tempting a prospect to not consider.
So for me, I think Jadeja's the better bat out of him and Akshar. And I don't think Akshar's form with the ball has showed me anything special. The only reason I would be looking at playing Akshar over Jadeja would be going to Australia specifically later on,
Yeah, the height.
thinking about a taller
thing.
bowler, right? That would be the only thing. And I don't know if you have to make that call at the moment anyway, but that would be if then I could sort of say for you, I could see why you would go that direction. For me, it's pretty easy though. I just go Jadeja, Ashwin, and Kuldeep. I think that's one of the best spin trios we've ever seen in Test cricket history. You've got one genuine number 7 who can occasionally bat at number 6 when you need him to, and has batted higher, but certainly can bat at number 6 without any issue. You've got Ashwin at home, who, as long as his back is intact, can still get you some runs there. And then you've got Kuldeep, who, is not a batter, but can give you a little bit of batting. So you're losing nothing on batting really overall, having all 3 of those in. You've got the wrist spinner spinning the ball both ways available to you. You've got the 2 finger spinners going each way. And yeah, I understand your actual point. It's a really interesting one. I think when no one knew how to play Akshar, there was a real argument that he could play ahead of Jadeja. I don't know now that teams have kind of worked out what his superpower is, that he's quite at that level anymore. But yeah, Sarat Chandra has asked this question like a million times. And it's like,
he has.
is the Bangladesh series to become this important due to them beating Pakistan this badly, or have they upped their level to beat India? So what we are looking at the moment is Bangladesh have 5 bowlers who are very good, right? And they have backup seam options as well, right? So that they've got this really interesting group of bowlers available to them. They've got backup seam bowlers and they've got backup spin bowlers. So they can play 3 seamers and they can play 4 seamers, maybe, perhaps, if they wanted to, although I don't think they have to with their lineup. They can play 4 spinners and a seamer, right? And not really lose all that much when it comes to talent. No team has been able to travel to India in a long time to be able to do this.
Yeah.
The fact that they beat Pakistan is because of this lineup, right? And it's the seamers overperforming and the spinners playing really, really well, and Pakistan, playing terribly. But to be honest, I thought Pakistan's bowling was a hell of a lot worse than their batting. So when you have a lineup like that, where there's enough of you to be able to go over, it makes it a much more interesting series. That's the difference. Put it this way: generally, if Bangladesh was to come over to play in any country in the world, one thing that teams knew, if they wanted to just win the series without thinking about it, would be just don't make the pitches spin and just make them green. Teams don't really think about things like that against Bangladesh at the moment. because New Zealand tried something like that and Pakistan tried to make their wickets more for seam bowlers. Now teams are a little bit like, oh, okay, how, we have to think about Bangladesh. And there's one final question here. It's a really, really interesting one from Aditya, who says, why do you think Bangladesh has not been able to scale up like the Sri Lanka did in the 90s? We haven't really fully processed what an incredible thing that Sri Lanka did. India weren't really a top-level international team until really the 60s, and yet they start playing in the 30s. New Zealand start playing Test cricket in the 1930s. They win their first Test series 39 years later, right?
Yeah.
When South Africa first started playing Test cricket, literally England was sending over blokes they found in the pub. Right. There are people who beat South Africa on that first Test series, Megha, who had never played first-class cricket before or after that series. Right? We see one good success team of a team getting really quick. And the truth is that Sri Lanka were probably really good for a long time and just weren't pushed ahead. My guess is that Sri Lanka probably start to get really good. And this is, they had some good players in the 30s as well, but they probably start to get really decent around the 50s and 60s. But unfortunately, so much so, when they got in the World Cup in 1975, Sri Lanka, right? This is such a weird story. Denmark and I think Canada, but it was Denmark and someone else, might have been Denmark and Holland, were so upset that Sri Lanka was ahead of them because they were just convinced they were better teams than Sri Lanka, right? No one had seen Sri Lanka. They hadn't seen this team play, right? And by 1979, Sri Lanka beat India in a World Cup, right? Which basically gets them Test status. So you have some teams who were held back too late, and then you have teams like New Zealand who were nowhere near. Argentina were a better team in the 1930s than New Zealand. Argentina should have been a Test-playing nation at the same time that New Zealand were, right? South Africa, America were probably a better team at that stage than South Africa were, right? And so you get some teams who get it for many varied reasons, and you get other teams who don't. Like the Netherlands. Look at the Netherlands bowling lineup. Like, who would you rather face in a Test match? Like Ireland's bowling lineup or the Netherlands bowling lineup? I think I'd pick Ireland, right? Ireland, good team in other ways, but I think I'd rather not face a full-strength Dutch Test bowling lineup on a fruity wicket with a little bit of grass on it. Good luck. That's a really good attack, right? And so you look at a one-off of Bangladesh and you say, whoa, they should be better by now. Yeah. But if you look at the history of Test cricket, their actual path is it's really hard to be good consistently in Test cricket. The other issue was that Bangladesh did maybe the stupidest thing in the history of Test cricket, in that for about 10 years they played with a bunch of players who struggled but understood Test cricket and traveled around the world and were getting better and were becoming professionals. And because they didn't have any success, they asked all of them and they started again with kids. So all of that institutional knowledge that those guys had, you might look at Habibul Bashir and go, he only averaged, 34. It's like, yeah, but he knew how to be a professional. He knew how to travel around the world. He understood all of these different things. So Bangladesh kind of threw away the start of their Test career and restarts it again. So you have to, when you start to really look into these sorts of things, and, I'm not expecting all of you to know that New Zealand took 39 years to win a Test series and 49 years to win their second, right? I'm not expecting anyone to know those sorts of things. But you have to understand that it's very hard. I had this conversation with a scientist years ago where he said to me, China will be in the best three Test playing nations within 5 years once they start playing cricket. And I was like, they won't. And he was like, you have to understand that when they throw their weight into... And I was like, no, I understand the financial stuff. I understand everything you're saying from that perspective. But what you don't know in Test cricket is all the little shibboleths that you can't learn and that no coach can teach you in 3 to 5 years. So I was watching Afghanistan at the 2015 World Cup, and they were teaching their bowlers, Andy Moles, and I can't remember who the other coaches were teaching their bowlers how to bowl cross seam, right? Megha, I learned how to bowl cross seam when I was 12, right? Not because I'm a genius, but because I grew up in a cricket culture, right? Yeah. Suddenly a coach said to me one day, you're bowling, I was bowling medium pace one day because we had no medium paces. And a coach just said to me, bowl cross seam. This wicket will help on cross seam. I didn't even know what he meant, but I bowled it and a ball step up and a guy pulled it straight up in the air and I got a wicket. And I was like, oh my God, this is a genius ball. Never got another wicket bowling cross seam in my life. But these are Afghan cricketers who were 30, 35, 25 professionals who didn't know about this. The knowledge that you need to be able to get to be at that level, right? And Bangladesh weren't really pushed as a cricket nation as much as they should have been when they were part of it, when they were East Pakistan and everything else. These things take time, right? We don't know if they'll ever be a great team, right? Like Sri Lanka might never win a World Test Championship. It takes a long time to be good at this. But what we have seen with Bangladesh over the last couple of years is flutters that things are going in the right direction. Finding fast bowlers. Finding a wrist spinner. We haven't even talked about the fact they've got a wrist spinner.
Yeah.
Like, I thought it was
finally.
against the law to bowl wrist spin in Bangladesh until a year ago.
But then you talked about that China story and how that scientists thought that China could turn out to be a good or a great cricketing nation in tests. What were his reasons? Just the financial might, or was there more to it? Genetics?
Yeah, financial might, coaching, and everything else. Like, I understood his general principle because I follow multiple sports, but I also know that China put a lot of money into basketball and have one of the best basketballers in the world.
Yeah.
And they're not, Serbia and Serbia, France, Australia, Canada don't put anywhere near as much money into their basketball.
Yeah.
And men's and women's. Like, I think the French get the silver in both of the Olympic things. I think America won the gold and France got silver. Australia had a decent side. Like, there were lots of decent sorts of teams. South Sudan came from nowhere and were really good in this last Olympics as well. So what are we actually talking about here? Like, China can put a lot of money in and get a lot of success, and we only have to watch the Olympics to see that. But they're not always the number one ranked Olympics team. They don't always win the most gold medals, right? And the problem with some of this is that a lot of these sports have these little shibboleths, right? And by shibboleth, what I mean is, I think it's a Jewish word, but it basically means a passed on thing that you don't even know that you know until someone asks you about it, right?
Yeah.
And cricket is right up there with the sport that has the most of those. Just little tiny things that you don't even realize that are really, really important. And little things that you pick up from time over years of having coaches, over generations of having coaches, right? That are really, really important. It's why one of these things of, like, we can all say that West Indies cricket is going to die, right? And people have been saying that for generations. But they keep producing really good cricketers because there is a cricket culture in the West Indies, right? And so if you're a good young cricketer in the West Indies, you're more likely to play for England now than you are from the West Indies, right? You're more likely to be a franchise player. But chances are there's some old bugger who maybe coaches Roddy Eswick, this is such a tangent here, but Roddy Eswick was a high school teacher, right? Imagine being in Barbados and going to high school and, like, having your high school teacher come over with a first-class bowling average of 20 who goes on to be the assistant coach of the West Indies. Like,
I wouldn't be complaining if I had such a teacher. So.
It'd be awesome, right? We would all, we would have loved that. And so when you live in a culture that has that, right?
Yeah.
You learn things that you can't anywhere else. Bangladesh had this really interesting thing in the 90s, I want to say, where their club cricket was really strong. I don't know if people know this, but I don't know if Indian players went over, but I think some Indian players went over. But a lot of Pakistani players would go to Bangladesh to play club cricket for money, right?
Yeah.
It's the one little period of which they had, I don't want to say professionalism, because it was like, it was like league cricket in England. It's not like professional, but it was one little period where they had great players coming over, really good players coming over, professionals coming over, making money and lifting their whole thing up. Ireland's test status comes on the back of the fact that in the 90s, Ireland was a really rich country and people would move to Ireland to make money because of the tech boom in Ireland, right? And a lot of those people, and then those people made a lot of money and they paid for international cricketers to play for Irish club teams, right? And some of those people stuck around and coached, right? Like Trent Johnston. Right? And some of them lived in Ireland for the rest of their lives and became players and became coaches and administrators and everything else. So think about when Bangladesh get good. They get good at a time when there's something going on within their club cricket where they can, pay players to come over. And that's when they go from basically being well behind a lot of others. In the 80s, Bangladesh cricket was well below Denmark cricket, right? No one's ever
Yeah,
going to remember
yeah.
that fact anymore. But that was a true thing. Denmark was a really good side. Denmark had county players. They were a really good team. And then a little
So
bit of
was
money
it
comes
also the
in.
case of not enough people playing in Bangladesh
No, I think they were playing. I
in
just think
general?
it was. I think I'm not an expert in the full history between '69 and '99, right? In that kind of period, but I think there were other issues going on in Bangladesh at that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think Pakistan didn't really leave them with a strong system because
yeah.
Pakistan didn't care about Bangladesh players, right? They basically just picked random Bangladeshi guys as 12th occasionally, and then very every now and again they would pick a Bangladesh. I think there's one guy who played 2 games for Pakistan from Bangladesh, and it was a token, and they didn't really think that much of it. So there was a big problem with the development side of things, and then. As I said, there was a little bit starts to happen in. I can't remember if the Pakistani and the Indian players start to play in the 80s, but I know certainly by the 90s, there's quite a few players playing over there. And once you start to get that, you can go through the history of cricket. Once you start to get those sorts of little things happening, it just means that the other cricketers suddenly, it doesn't matter if that overseas player is like a great player, right? That player has come from a professional country. They've come from coaching. They've come, so they upskill
The processes.
everyone. And they show people how you actually should be training. And it's little things like that. And so the fact that Bangladesh and Ireland had a similar sort of thing happen to them through club cricket, I think tells you where we're at. But then look at the changes of professionalism of cricket over the last couple of years. Bangladesh came in as an amateur cricket culture just as the world was turning professional. Like what a crap time to come in and like be like, oh, we're just gonna go about our things and we'll be fine.
Have
and it's
fun.
like, and on the other side, Australia's got like academies, right? And MRF's pace thing, and Rod Marsh gets
Yeah.
yanked to England, and you know, and
Biomechanics is
yeah,
different shade.
and Bob Woolmer and all the science, sports science, biomechanics, as you're talking about, and all that sort of stuff. All that happens in Bangladesh at that point, and so things. In cricket at that point.
Yeah, in
And,
general, yeah.
and just and dietitians and analysts and all that sort of stuff. And Bangladesh come in as essentially they're a little bit behind all that curve. So I'm not massively surprised that has happened. Right, I'm not massively surprised that they have struggled, but it's just Megha. When it comes down to it, it is really hard to be really good at Test cricket because only a handful of nations have ever really got to number one. And if you think about Pakistan, 1930, right, to what,
Yeah.
2019 or whenever it was that they won the world, was it 2020? 2020, wasn't it? That's 90 years, right? And they spent more than half of those as being the worst team in the world, right? So they've gone from that to being good enough to be at the top. It's a hard journey, right? Why did New Zealand suddenly get good? Their players went on strike in first-class cricket. They weren't even getting paid. So I'm not sure you can technically call it a strike. That's Ian O'Brien's joke. But essentially, they went on strike and they said, we're not going to play first-class cricket until we get paid, right? That's Ross Taylor. That was supposed to be his first year of first-class cricket, right? So Ross Taylor,
It's that recent. Yeah.
when he started his career, was going to be starting as an amateur player. Ross Taylor, right? Look at what happened when they started paying their players.
Wow.
Whoever
asked that
professionals, it matters.
question?
Yeah. Well, he asked it
Whoever asked that
83
question, thank
times, Sarat. And so, but yeah, I think you need to know about the full culture. And look, we're not going to be doing as many podcasts on Cricket 8 over the next little while. So I wanted to give you guys that was me off the long run. Megha is just sitting there going, my God, I'm going to need,
No. I'm just grateful to the person who asked that question. And quickly here, also, like, this another question before we conclude. Rishabh says genetics also, because I alluded to that point when talking about China, causes Bangladesh difficulty. They have lowest average height in the world. At the moment, their paces
I don't know if
are
they
pretty
do
tall.
have the lowest average height in the world, because I think Papua New Guinea has a lower average height than Bangladesh. So I think they're not even the lowest average height of the last World Cup, if I'm right. Look, I think that plays a part, but I don't think that matters. Like, if you think about
So much in cricket because it's about combination of skills as compared to, say, sprint.
you want a fast batter and a short batter, right? And you want a tall bowler and a short bowler. So I
exactly.
do think I don't think it doesn't mean anything, but I don't think Sri Lankans are particularly tall off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Like, I could be wrong, but I think genetics does play a part, but if you think about Australia, you're talking about 25 million people. If you think about New Zealand, you're talking about what, 5 million, 4.5 million people?
Yeah.
Right? You could have a lot more tall people in Bangladesh than you can have probably in New Zealand. And I could be wrong. Like maybe if we go through, maybe there are more people over 6'3" in New Zealand than there are in Bangladesh. I don't think so because there's so many people in Bangladesh, but we could be wrong with that. But these things play a part, but also they play a part in other ways as well. Well, like there are advantages to Bangladesh for a long period of time. It's going to have cricket as their number one sport, right? So there are strengths and weaknesses within Bangladesh. My memory of Cricinfo was that Cricinfo was always the most used or second most used website in Bangladesh, right? And they didn't even really look after the Bangladeshi fans all that much, right? Especially before Muhammad Isam. But even Muhammad Isam, he's like one guy for a huge country with lots of cricket stories, right? And then they had like 1.5 people working for them. They weren't producing a lot of Bangladesh content. And yet that website was absolutely huge for them. So that they have advantages that Ireland's never going to have, right? But Ireland has advantages that Bangladesh doesn't have, such as there are a lot of people from Ireland who have Irish ancestry, but might grow up in different places all around the world, right? And Bangladesh has never exploited that side of it. So none of the Asian sides have really exploited that side of things yet, right? Which is, why not? Why didn't the PCB offer Usman Khawaja a big contract?
Yeah.
Right? There are lots of players, Adil Rashid, Moeen Ali, so many players around the world. Nasser Hussain probably wasn't get into the full strength Indian side, but there are lots of people that you could start to do that. Bangladeshis are moving out of Bangladesh. It's a rapidly developing culture, right? So there are that. And I do remember actually, we have to finish here because I'm starving. But I remember, I think it was Jamie Siddons was coaching Bangladesh, and there was a press conference we were at, and someone said to him, where are all the Bangladeshi fast bowlers? And he goes, we're in England, and there are a lot of people who are Bangladeshi in England. Why doesn't one of them come down to the nets and show me that they can bowl, 85 miles an hour and hit the wicket? Teams don't quite, the associate teams are really good at that stuff, right? The Netherlands seem to find, if someone's visited the Netherlands once and asked them if they want to come play for their team. Ireland's quite good at that as well. We haven't seen that from some of the other nations. Cricket has developed differently in different circumstances, right? That's a really interesting one going ahead of, as people are, I think my kids qualify to play for 3 different nations, right? We are going to see people over and over again have that kind of ancestry as they come through the systems of, like, it might even be 4 different nations at times, right? Like, it could be all sorts of craziness. So how you as a cricket culture deals with that, it might be the difference between being a very good side and a great side. You only need to steal 2 guys, some Bangladeshi kid who maybe was, brought up in Dhaka, but then grows up in England, gets to 20, and you're like, well, you can play county cricket and maybe you'll play for England, or we'll give you a contract tomorrow. Right? And we'll give you a contract tomorrow. Do you want to bat first drop? We think you're that good. We're going to bet on you now. I think there's a genuine future in that, but that's professionalism, right? Making those sorts of decisions and also being aware that they might be wrong. They might pick that 20-year-old kid and he gets over to Bangladesh and he can't play left arm finger spin. Yeah. And it's the worst decision they've ever made. Right? Like, do you know what? There's one Jofra Archer. Do you want to know how many other West Indian kids have gone through posh English schools and not become very good at cricket and still got contracts? There's a long list of them.
Indeed. And because you're starving, can't hold on to you for long. So we'll have to conclude this. But remember to follow us across social media platforms. And we'd be, for the next few weeks, coming live just once a week. And probably to compensate for that, Jarrod gave us half an hour extra time.
Yeah, I went over.
Thank you, Jarrod. Yeah?
Thank you, Megha. Come to cricket8.com for the best scorecards with visual representation of who is winning at any moment, plus live footage from some matches as well. You can also see what the market is thinking. There is simply no place to follow this sport live